ora e te iwi and welcome to a special episode of Playmakers today. We are celebrating International Women's Day. Now I have two very special guests with me today to discuss their journey being successful sportswomen here in Aotearoa and a whole lot more. Let me introduce to you first Miss Louisa Wall. Kia ora, Louisa.
Kia ora.
And in front of me today, and colleague of mine now,
Yes.
Sky Sports, Storm Purvis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rav. It's nice to be here.
Cool. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you both because I feel it's a discussion that we should be having a little bit more often, celebrating our our wahine, not only in sport but in the surrounding work that women do to ensure our women's success in sport as well. So I really wanted to start today with you both talking about your sporting journeys because representative sport for you both would have looked very different on your journeys. So Louisa, we'll start with you. What was it about sport in general that attracted you as a young girl?
Well, in general, it was growing up in an environment where both my parents valued sport. My father played a lot of rugby and in fact some rep rugby for Auckland Māoris, and so his passion and love of rugby was certainly ingrained in our household. We got up in the middle of the night to support the All Blacks and we're very passionate. I come from the King Country area and then latterly Waikato, so very focused on what was happening in the rugby space. And my mum played netball. She wasn't as competitive as my dad, but she had a love like he did for sport. So I think when you grow up in that environment, very early on, you end up playing. So I was 5 when I started playing rugby. And in fact, I played for my dad's club, College Old Boys in Taupō. And interesting story, I'm a child of the 70s. I am, kind of aging myself. But I was banned from rugby after my first year because they didn't realise I was a girl. And then when they did, they said, girls should be playing rugby. Wow. So that kind of led me down paths playing soccer and basketball and a whole range of other sports, but I was then able to focus on netball. But that love and passion, I think, drove me to want to be successful, and I had an aptitude, so I got picked in sports teams. I think I was 11 when I made my first rep team. That was the South Waikato, would have been the old Form 1s back then. But really that pathway was encouraged fundamentally because of my parents, and then people in the community saw I had potential and then invested in me and provided me with the tools that I needed to be successful.
Wow. I wonder what they thought later on in life when you did what you did for the Black Ferns, knowing that you weren't able to play there as a little girl at the beginning.
Well, it was interesting because when the Black Ferns did win that inaugural Women's World Cup in 1998, I was able to return back to Taupō, and actually Owen Delaney, he was very famous. There's a stadium named after him. He was part of the people who decided that I should have been banned. So it was interesting going back years later, having been successful, and I actually gifted some of my rugby jerseys, and they're part of a display at Owen Delaney Park, and I think it really spoke to that time and where women were in society, our ability to play sport, and obviously some sports were restricted to us, but then the evolution of the thinking behind now supporting the Black Ferns and our women's sevens teams, and there being really no barrier to women playing any sport.
Yeah, most definitely. And what about your journey, Storm? Obviously a little bit more different. I mean, Louisa did play netball and rugby, and yours was from what we know, is a netball background, but what was your journey like?
Not too dissimilar in the fact that grew up in a small rural town just south of Christchurch near Horswell, and had an older brother, so there was a lot of kicking a ball around, playing backyard cricket, running races and things like that. And I was always quite athletic and super competitive, so that was my main drive for wanting to play sport. It was something I was good at and enjoyed winning. But my background comes from athletics, so I was a runner and did 400 and 800 metres quite competitively. Moved to Auckland, started running for Papakura Athletics Club, loved my years there. And then when I turned 11, I needed my first knee surgery. And so my netball injury and career has been plagued with knee issues, which quite a few people know about because I'm very vocal about it. But after I recovered from that, I came back to athletics and I was just so much slower than everyone else. So obviously a key period in development during that recovery that kind of maybe stunted a few things for me. And then moved on to high school, was starting Form 1 at Diocesan School in Auckland, coming from Clevedon, another rural village in Auckland. And I didn't know anyone at the school, had no friends, and Mum and Dad really pushed me into playing netball because it's a super popular girls' sport in New Zealand. I was always quite tall and obviously had that athletic background. And so it was kind of straight away thrown into the top team for my age, having never played. But the main drive for me was about making friends. And that stayed true for me my entire career. My best friends are still netball players, and definitely a massive drive for why I played it.
Oh, it's interesting you both come from, rural towns. In the city, I feel like there's, current day, I mean, I have children in school right now. Current day, the options are just astronomical. And I think, my daughter's playing at least 3 sports at the moment. Back when I was at school, that wasn't the case, and only, boys threw around the rugby ball, to be fair. Even a basketball, only boys were playing basketball at the time. What did sports programs look like when you were younger, when you look at today's curriculum?
Gosh, I must have been lucky because I was able to play multiple sports. I played tennis and cricket in the summer, and then in the winter I played basketball, and was a bit like Storm. I was incredibly competitive, and then really fortunate that people saw I had some potential and invested in me. A woman called Christine Wills, who was one of my teachers, took quite a bit of burden from my parents, and when I started showing some promise, she would drive me to Hamilton from Taupo to attend clinics in the evenings, and then on the weekends she was able to support my parents. I'm the eldest of 4 children, so it was really difficult for them to be able to total my development in the game. But really the only barrier has been about access to particular sports at particular times because of my parents' working commitments. So I really do have to credit the school system for providing opportunities for girls to be involved in as many sports as possible, and then being able to leverage off that. And obviously within the competitions I played in, there were club teams that you could then evolve into playing for, which meant you had a higher level of competition and then could be selected for greater honours.
It's really funny, I feel like in that particular space, sport's done a real 360. Hearing you, Louisa, say that you played lots of sport growing up and were able to do that until quite an old age before you did specialise. When I was at school and playing netball, it was pretty much from Form 3 that I had to stop everything else and only play netball. And I loved all sports, so that was quite hard, but at the same time, being so competitive and wanting to do well and wanting to succeed, it was like, yeah, of course, I won't do anything else. Netball's it. Netball's all I'll do. And so netball was really my sporting background for 20 years there for a while. And whereas now I feel like they've gone back, there's a lot more awareness around playing a lot of sports when you're young, when you're developing, and the importance of having different backgrounds and different a different access to different sports and the functionality and stuff that brings. So it's really done in that short space of time, like a full 360, and the awareness around how multiple sports is actually really important.
Yeah, there's a lot of young people out there, and even a little bit older. Our athletes are actually starting to compete at a bit of an older age now with all the technology that we have and things like that. When you think about that World Cup that you were talking about earlier, Louisa, for the Black Ferns, the Women's Rugby World Cup, do you ever think back at that time and look at current day and think, man, this is very different to what we experienced back in our time, or not?
Oh, no. I mean, the opportunities are different today. I mean, you can be a professional female athlete in our country and have that investment via your national sporting organisation and the relationships that sports have with their sponsors to get work or to be engaged in further study or whatever it may be. I mean, what drove a lot of us when I was playing was just our passion for the sport, and then wanting to be the best, wanting to go to the World Championship and win for our country. And a lot of us were working and studying and doing a multitude of things because we had decided to dedicate our lives to that pursuit. I think for me now, it is about providing opportunities and as many opportunities as possible, and particularly for people who don't have the opportunity to watch Sky Sport. Just saying, not everyone has a subscription or to be able to go to the Stars games at Pullman Park. And it really is engaging for me with communities where I know if they had an opportunity, we could create, ignite a spark in some of those young girls from our new migrant ethnic communities, for example, maybe the Indian and Asian community, for Māori and Pacific young people. Because what I've realised in sport and with sport is that it's so focused on preparation for an event. It enables you to focus and dedicate yourself to a pursuit that you can then transfer as skills into other areas of life, whether it be education or the ethic that you take into the workforce. And so for me, sport, I see as fundamental to the growth and development of women and girls in New Zealand because of all the skills that you learn and the focus that you have to be successful.
And see, you would know a little bit more about that support that's given to the modern day athlete in terms of sponsorship, even down to kakahu, to clothes and uniforms and things like that. Things have changed dramatically. I recently did a feature story with the Kiwi Ferns, who in 1995 had to fund themselves to go to a World Cup. So when you think about that, and it's a World Cup year again for them, I don't think they'll be paying their own way this time. But you would know a bit more about that financial support at the very least. Oh,
absolutely. I remember my first ANZ contract back when I was 18, so not even 10 years ago. The minimum wage for netball back then was a figure that has now doubled 10 years down the line. So even in the space that I've been a professional athlete, the growth has definitely been huge. Obviously still a really long way to go, and we're all pushing towards that, and every year there seems to be growth in that space. But sponsorship, like we've seen the Ferns win, Silver Ferns win a Netball World Cup, and how many new sponsors have we had come on board over the last 12 months? And just the awareness in the streets of, oh yeah, that's right, Silver Ferns, they're our top women's sport, they're really good, they won a World Cup. And the I guess the opportunities that arise from just success and actually being seen in the public is huge. So I definitely feel fortunate that I played a sport that was so heavily funded, I guess, in both spaces, not just from the government and things, but having the commercial opportunities. And we kind of learn how to market ourselves as well, and there's a huge space for your own personal brand to grow and pick up opportunities in that space as well, and that's something I'd like to see grow more in netball and other women's sports across the country. Need to figure out how we can market ourselves as women in this space, as opposed to just jumping on the back of the All Blacks campaign or the Black Caps campaign, just figuring out those differences, because there's a massive space for it. And in the days of social media and girls, on social media, we can get eyes everywhere. So the growth, I think the ceiling is super high for growth in that space. And even in that short amount of time, like I said, that I was playing, there was a lot of growth. So it's exciting to see where it can go.
Could you have imagined, Louisa, social media back when you were playing at that Rugby World Cup?
Oh no, I don't think anyone could have imagined it except for the people who developed it in the first place, who are entrepreneurs and obviously people who had a vision for how we could connect with one another. And really that's what the social media platforms provide, is a mechanism to connect very intimately and very quickly to multitudes of people. We do have an issue within the media space. I mean, you're probably aware of this, Rav, but only 15% of our media content focuses on women's sport. And even in Olympic year, that only jumps up to, I think it's 28%. So we still have challenges. And again, for me, I think it's because the governors of the sport have historically been men and still continue to be. And also the CEOs of sport. There's only 7% of CEOs across our national sporting organisations of women. Obviously, with someone like Raelene Castle coming on board and now leading Sport New Zealand, there hopefully will continue to be evolution in this space. But the reality is the governors of sport in New Zealand historically have been men, and so they've oriented their organisations to deliver the best outcomes for men. And it's only just been in the last, say, 10, 15 years where there now has to be provision for opportunities for women. But we continue to I guess, talk about these issues and highlight these issues, and also why having 50% women on our boards is really important.
Exactly. It's that representation too, isn't it? I mean, the way that women perceive sport, perceive athletes, anything is a very unique lens. And I think I can kind of feel, working in media, I can kind of feel the wheel turning on this a little bit, that it is starting to shine through. But I also think, 100% conversations like this need to be real and raw for anything to change. If you don't recognise that something is wrong or needs to change, it just won't. So hence why you two beautiful ladies are here today. But in your experience, Storm, you're now working in broadcasting yourself, working for media. You've done, did I see you in a radio DJ thing down south once upon a time?
Oh, yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yes, you
I thought
did.
so.
Yeah, a long time ago. That was when I really started to try and plant the seed that it was something I wanted to get into. And Lee Piper, who's a old radio network, as it was called back in the day, legend, gave me a wee slot at 8 a.m. on the country sport breakfast or something way back then when I got to interview who I wanted. So that was quite fun. But you're right, Rav, I have kind of transitioned into that media space, and it is turning over. I would agree with you there, but it's still really eye-opening for me, working for The Crowd Goes Wild and going to a NRL press conference and I'm the only female reporter there, or going to the Blues and media managers handing out the press release to everyone but me, and just kind of walks past me and hands it to the next person. Those kind of things, I was kind of like, okay, so this is going to be a little bit harder than I thought. And even when I first started on the desk for Crowd Goes Wild, some of the Facebook messages we'd get or comments being like, who's this blonde bimbo? What does she know about sport? Rah, rah, rah. And I'm sitting next to James McConey, and he's a genius, he's hilarious, but I'm a silver fern, I've represented my country. What's James McConey done? Why are you getting into him about what he knows about sport? The great thing is I've been in this role for 2 years now, and those comments have 100% stopped. And so once they got used to me being on camera and hearing what I had to say, and just, I guess, having that time to get to know our viewers and whatnot, those comments have completely stopped, which is great. The issue is that they were there in the first place, and I'd love to think that in the future that we can just get rid of those hideous armchair critics that just don't like seeing a female sitting there talking about rugby. It was really, really eye-opening. But like I said, in the past sort of year, haven't had any of those, which is great. But
it's good.
Growing in the space, it was definitely a steep learning curve.
Especially in that sport environment, isn't it? It's one thing to be a female, I think, in media, yourself, Louisa, in government, in general, let alone being a female. And people would think that this problem doesn't exist, but it really, really does. And you can talk to, every second woman in the industry will tell you about their stories where they have experienced things like what you experienced at the rugby presser, That's
why I wanted to get into media, and actually specifically The Crowd Goes Wild, because they tell great stories about athletes that you don't just see in your everyday kind of newspaper or on the news and things. So I try so hard to get as much netball in there, and knowing a big crop of the current players and the different stories they have and the personalities they have. I'd like to think that I'm trying super hard to get lots of those stories out there, and Louisa's right, we can do our part to just really lift that profile and keep going. And so that's a big reason why I get up every day and do what I do, is being able to pump as many cool stories out there as possible, because in all sports that women are playing, there are incredible stories about mothers and hardships they've been through and what a day in the life looks like for them as a female athlete. So feel very privileged that I get to do that in my role as a reporter at Crowd. It's great.
And even sitting here, being blessed to be able to come to work every day and, present shows such as this, it's actually quite comforting to know that things like this are happening in the background. Absolutely. That there is the support there for women on the field, off the field, and anyone who's trying to, be that support mechanism around it, because you can get a bit lost in the industry. You can feel, alone and secluded. Now, swinging this back around to, to the reason we're here and celebrating women, even though, you know, we're celebrating it every single day, and we're trying to produce as much of it as we can every single day. The theme for International Women's Day this year is women in leadership in the times of COVID-19, which we know has ravaged the world and has, I mean, look at us today, Louisa, you're in the wall talking to us because of that very reason. But when I think about, you know, the momentum that our women are finally starting to show, and now we see, you know, pinnacle events being not cancelled, but postponed. The Women's Rugby World Cup, obviously, just come out of hot off the press. You know, the cricket's T20 has been pushed back. We don't know what's going to happen with the Rugby League, which is set for England in November. And of course, there's the Olympics as well. What are your thoughts on that? And can this, you know, I can't say is it a good or bad thing, because it's a negative. But where do you think this leaves our women right now, knowing that, you know, they've worked towards these events so bloomin' hard, and, you know, it's going to get pushed back now?
I think we've got a resilience that will enable many of the athletes to refocus. I mean, timelines change and you adapt and you have different ways of preparing. It will be sad for some people, I think, and particularly the Olympics, because it only happens every 4 years, and you have to keep wondering at what point, if it is delayed another year, do they say, well, we're only 2 years out? I've got huge respect for people like Kieran Smith, who leads our Olympic team, and they will be doing all the preparations and planning. It'll be hugely disappointing, but as I said before, I think sport creates a resilience in you that means you just refocus, and so you reassess your goals. Happens all the time. We get injuries, we have to reassess, but I think we're because of that competitive element, where we have an ability to just continue to rise above whatever challenges we face, because in fact that's what we experience every minute that we're on a court. The challenges, the trials, the tribulations of battling the best. I mean, I when I watched the netball last night, you know, good on Australia for coming out and actually showing some form, and they have a lot of new players, but they took their opportunity, and that never say die attitude. I mean, and that's pretty much, I think, why sport, I think, is so fundamental to the growth and development of our children, because of what it teaches us.
Definitely. And Storm, while you were playing for the Stars, you were actually in amongst it all when COVID first hit,
Yes.
with changes and not being able to be at your home court and things like that. So what was that experience like? Was there much worry in the camp?
I don't know about worry. Louisa makes a great point about our resilience and our ability just to get on with it and deal with what we're facing and just get out there and do it. And I think the ANZ Premiership last year was a great example of that really happening. Straight away, Kate Agnew, who was head of events at Netball New Zealand, was into her work like 12 hours a day, just on the phone, sorting out plan A, B, C, D. I was part of a working group to try and get that competition going, and a few players were consulted, and it was like version 9.66A being sent out of the drawer, and I was thinking, Kate, and it's coming through at 3 a.m. I hope you're sleeping. And so the fact that we got that competition off the ground and the success it was is a true testament to exactly what Louisa is saying. So that was definitely quite interesting to be a part of, and being my last year in netball was definitely quite bittersweet. In terms of the momentum and hopefully not halting that in women's sport, I think people like you and I and the public have a great responsibility in making sure that when this time comes around again, that we are getting it out there as much as possible. If they're not happening because there are no crowds, then we make sure that when they do happen, those stadiums are full and there's so much support behind it, so that we can see that while this was missed last year, but how great that it was postponed, because we can have people in the stadium and people going to media press conferences and things like that. So the responsibility falls back on us to make sure we start that momentum again, I think. In terms of the athletes, I think Louisa's totally right. This is what we're used to, and it's no different to an injury or any sort of hardship that you face. So the players and athletes, they'll be fine.
Well, Wahine Ma, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. Loving what you're doing, Louisa, what you're doing in a government space, in a place that, of making change and sitting at the tables that can, you know, help with the decisions in the future and Storm yourself in broadcasting. I mean, we can be what we can see. So thank you so much for all you do, and have a great International Women's Day.
Right back at you, Rav.
Kia ora. I agree. Happy International Women's Day.